Well, after that introduction, as they say, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say to you. So thank you, Paul, and Jason, for allowing us to be part of this event today. Thank you for my predecessor speakers for a deep and enthralling discussion on facades, where I suppose we've picked on a topic that is probably a little bit more indiscreet in buildings, which, if I get to use that's done proper. So we talked about public health, and Paul just gave a great introduction of why the advances in public health, particularly in the last 150 years, sort of going back to Victorian England and the dangers of even drinking water. So that's why a lot of Brits probably grew up drinking a lot of beer, because it was much safer than the clean water. But we're going to look at drainage solutions, so probably less glamorous than most things in a building, but equally dangerous. And when we talk about public health, I often use a prop when I present. So the universe delivered this to me this morning. I was searching around. We've all got one of those drawers in our house, right, where everything goes in and just stays there. And we all remember using these, do we? I went for a run this morning. Trying to run in one of these in 40 degrees of heat was extremely difficult. But we've just lived through possibly the greatest public health disaster in a generation, probably only akin to the Spanish flu in the First World War, to kill as many people or to be dangerous. And we're still dealing with a lot of the impacts of poor public health and what that does to us when we talk about viruses and pathogens. So a little bit about who we are, just in case you didn't know. There is a standout there. My colleagues are actually here today. So if you want to know a little bit more about Polypipe and the Genuit Group and what we do, but we are the region's leading provider of climate and water management solutions. Predominantly water. Water goes up, something comes out. Managing that safely in the built environment, both in buildings and infrastructure. We've been here a long time, longer than I've been here, and I think I've been here a long time, but I'm glad Paul used a story from 1904 earlier. Our heritage does date back to the Victorian era, where key engineering known as terrain was first to establish pitch fibre drainage, which was the byproduct of a paper product. And then in the late 60s, we were the first people to put it in PVC drainage. So our heritage in drainage goes back quite a long time. We're happy to say that we've been here well over 60 years in the region. In fact, our oldest partner in Abu Dhabi can talk about pulling drainage pipes on the beach in Land Rovers and chains because there weren't any feeder vessels in the 50s. So an incredible history here and some incredible projects. That's that, pitch fibre drainage and some Victoria gentlemen. So, on with the case study. So, smart and healthy cities. Obviously, you'll know these facts. These are UN facts and UNESCO facts. But where we get high-density populations or even medium-density populations now, the trend is towards 2050 that 2/3 of the world's population will live in cities. And obviously, MENA is a large part of that population growth, about 6% of the world's population. But unfortunately, it has one of the highest usage per person per day of water, estimates up to about 980 litres. And if you compare that with something like London, that's about 120 to 150. So there's some work to be done there in terms of using water better. But in terms of building drainage, I mean, this is a typical sort of high-rise podium deck arrangement where water gets transported into the building, into the fixtures and fittings. I'll try and use the laser, but there we go. Oh, look at that. That's quite posh, isn't it? So here in our built environment, and drainage then takes that water away safely. Now, that could be storm water, that could be foul water, that could be grey water. But one of the things that's not really explicit when we talk about the importance of good drainage is the protection of the people in that building from what's in that drainage system and the potential hazards. And it's often not that well thought of, where we're actually close to some of the viruses and pathogens that live in our drainage system. And when we have a bad smell or a failure, we're actually living in that environment, and that's quite dangerous to our health. So why do buildings smell? Not a lot of people understand how a drainage system works. It tends to be below floors, in behind walls, within ceiling spaces. It's not something very visible in our living environment, but as somebody described drainage to me, was that it was a bit like toothpaste. So you'll never know which brand of toothpaste I used this morning, but you'll know if you talk to me after my breath smells. So me and my wife invest heavily in a good brand of toothpaste because I don't want you to think I've got smelly breath, right? But you'll still never know which brand I've used. So quite common across the world, not just in the Middle East, but workmanship and installation, the project management of that. Patchwork product installations. I recently did a survey on quite a large tower in Business Bay that overlooks quite a famous set of fountains. And we had 4 different types of product in the riser. And the FM team didn't even know what types of product they were. They had to smash down walls. And, drainage is very, very, very expensive if you have to go looking for it. And it is quite a cheap system to put in compared to some of the more elaborate HVAC systems. Poor jointing. You get a huge mismatch of jointing here. It's very common in Europe when we talk about commercial buildings, high-rise, that we use a welded joint. We see all different types of joints, possibly some push-fit joints that erode over time. But also drainage, what not a lot of people talk about, it's not just about the fluids and the fluid mechanics, it's actually about air movement. So the drainage system must be airtight and watertight at all times. So when you haven't got fluid in there, it's actually full of air. And when you discharge something into the system, that air has to go somewhere. And if it doesn't, it generally comes, and that's where we get the foul smells. I'm not going to run through all these things, but there's a popular statement on LinkedIn at the minute that the drainage is called the pathogen treatment train. So there's some nasty stuff that live in your drainage system, and it's about not getting that into your living environment. It also impacts indoor air quality. It decreases the efficiency when you get leaky drainage. I'm not sure it enhances the building value, but it can certainly decrease a building value when you get tenants who currently sue a developer for unlivable conditions. And that's becoming more prevalent in the Middle East. It's becoming more explicit. When we talk about commercial arenas, quite often we get involved with a lot of healthcare projects, particularly hospitals. There tends to be a very high specification and design around drainage. You wouldn't expect to go into a hospital to get sick. Certainly not in England in the NHS, but here certainly with some of the wonderful hospitals. And then we talk about elaborate 7-star hotels, different uses of buildings. Drainage is the one constant that preserves life in the building as well as design for the life of the building. And my argument to that is whether that's a 3-star hotel or a 7-star hotel or a hospital, the drainage, your right to life and health is the same, right? You shouldn't have a different spec or a different quality of product. There are lots of other things that you can change about the marble and the floor and the facades and all the other things that don't impact people's life. But when you're talking about the public's health, I don't think there should be a difference depending on the function of the building. So I'll just let you read that. I won't read all of those stats on there, but what's in a sewer gas? Is there any chemists or biologists in the room? Does anyone know what the other name for hydrogen sulfide is? Commonly used in war settings, but mustard gas. So attacks the respiratory system. It's often done from decomposing sewers when there's no oxygen available. And it produces the really foul, eggy smell. That's what creates that smell. It's common in swamps and drainage systems. So maintaining that water seal and not allowing that foul air into your thing is really important. And there are studies in Europe, all over the world actually, but mainly in Europe, about how poor air quality can lead to increased stress, absenteeism, poor health, pneumonia, headaches, even death. I think there's a SARS epidemic in Hong Kong a few years ago where the actual report written by the university attributed sewer gas transfer through the floor gullies as part of the problem that hurt those people in the apartment block. So because we spend 90% of our time in day, or actually when it's 49 degrees, you probably spend 100% of your time indoors, it's really important we protect our health. This probably isn't the solution that you're after, right? So So just in terms of what we do as a business, we don't just look at drainage as conveyance, we look at it as air movement as well. So we've got some clever systems that drain roofs effectively, that use less outlets. For us, it's about sometimes capturing that stormwater, making sure we don't just get rid of it and treat it as a waste product where there's water available, particularly stormwater. If you design with an asset, you can have a very different outcome for the people in that building, the ability to create things like green infrastructure. We've got solutions that fit inside empty use space like car parks. We all see high-rise drainage here, we all see high-rise buildings, and we've got 9 floors of car parks, which are dead space. Does anybody know what dictates the height of a car park usually? It's the gravity drainage. So if you remove the gravity drainage, there's a lot of construction benefits as well. By changing the drainage methodology, you can then save a lot of carbon on cement and concrete and actually reduce heights of buildings and slab thicknesses. So there are some ROIs there to perhaps some of the main contractors out there and the clients who want some carbon efficient solutions. We do some very basic stuff. The picture there, we do a lot of prefabricated systems now for modular and off-site, where we can work in our factory scenario and test 100% of the joints and systems. The advantage to the builder, you don't pay us when we're not working, so you only pay for the product. You don't have to pay for people all year round and transportation and all the other things that you pay for. And 2, if there is a failure on that joint, it doesn't even leave our factory. It stays in our factory, we redo it. You don't have to test things in situ. So there's quite a number of ways we can help you with efficient drainage system. I think the secret for us, though, is to look at the supply chain, and far too often or not, somebody will ring us 3 weeks before they want to procure drainage, and to be fair, there's not a lot of value we can offer there. The building's already up, the structure's already designed. The earlier we're engaged as a business, the better it is. The more value we can add in. It's easy to red pen a drawing up, it's easy to redesign shafts and all the other things. When it's built, that's kind of how it is, right? It becomes a procurement thing. So get all those issues back out in the upstream. As I said, maximum ability to innovate and design out cost. Enable technology and knowledge transfer. I think we were talking about Rolls-Royce earlier. I don't think Airbus have an open vendor list for aeroplane engines, do they? So when safety matters, partnerships are really good. But there's a distinct difference between a partnership and a procurement is where you need some vulnerability. You need to share information. You may need some contractual benefits. We work better when we work with clients in this scenario than just at procurement. And when the heat's on, when the building's up and the pressure is to finish it, generally things are missed off. So this is what I was talking about. So the earlier the better. We even get involved with some concept report stuff, particularly where there's new and innovative ways of draining roofs. So one of our innovative products here is blue-green roofs. But you need a lot of different people in the room. You need structures, you need facades, you need MEP. You need a lot of collaboration early on. You can't just build a structure and then apply a green roof, although we do retrofit products here. So we spend an awful lot in planning and design. Then it's appropriate product selection. A large part of the value we offer is about optimization. There are lots of ways of complying to design code. So if you look at 12056, which is the drainage design code, there are 4 allowable systems in buildings. Sometimes our systems will allow you to design more efficiently with less product and being able to achieve some construction benefits. Sometimes they won't. But unless you explore that at an early stage, that's a very easy thing to do. Trying to do that through procurement is incredibly difficult. And then we move on, modularization, which is a passion of ours. It's particularly repetitive build, large residential or hotels where there's repetitive, let's say, apartments where you probably only need 4 or 5 different types of products, but they need to be produced away in a factory. That really does lend itself. A lot of the buildings here lend itself to modularization, but there's a huge challenge here in the way we procure construction. That's what prevents modularization. You have to start with the outset of modularization. It's not something you can perhaps do halfway through, or not easily anyway. And then you look at our history here and some of our brands, and we've been glad to say we've been involved with some of the best products. But I think, I was recently involved in a meeting with HKA and Paul and a number of other industry leaders. And one of the challenges we've always faced here is that speed to build. And we tend to miss all the bits out in the start, and we just want it built faster and cheaper. But these are really fundamental to get to that. And then, some sustainability elements and O&M. So, we're involved with projects sometimes for 5, 6, 7 years. A good case study with that would be probably the London Olympics, where we were involved 4 years before anything was built. We were appointed early. It was delivered under budget, on time. And we were able to enter into technology partnerships with things like the BRE. We developed new things like fire collars that the ODA wanted, because we're involved early, right? If you contract with us 3 weeks before you need it, obviously you're going to get what you get. So just a little bit of passion of mine, actually. This is my sort of attack on procurement. So if anyone's in procurement here, I really apologise. But, I wanted to, I think this was last year, so I wanted to renew my home hi-fi system and TV and surround sound, and I think I still got a DVD player, although, we use a lot of the internet now. And my wife, she's from Tunisia, so she quite enjoys a coffee and a muffin every day, a latte and a pastry. So obviously, which costs more? So I aggregated out my purchase of, it happened to be Sony at the time. Now, the payback period, I must say, was probably long after I'm dead, but I'm still going to have that system, whereas that's a repeat buy. And when you come to things like drainage, you really don't want to be looking at the short-term issues. You want to be designing for the life of the building. You want to be designing for the life in the building. And I don't work for GlaxoSmithKline, by the way, but Panadol saves me every weekend, or nearly every weekend, when it stops my headache or allows me to go and play golf. And you just keep buying it, and that's not something that you want to do in existing buildings, particularly with drainage. So just the last couple of slides, really. I think, yes, there's a fundamental need to have good functioning drainage, and it protects people. But it's also index linked to health and well-being. If you can store stormwater, then you can start to create things like green roofs and multifunctional spaces. You can add amenity into buildings, biodiversity. As I said, start designing with that water as an asset rather than a waste product, and suddenly you can achieve very different outcomes. So that's me. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any questions?
Thank you ever so much indeed, Adam. Any questions? What an excellent presentation. Very interesting. Any questions for Adam Smith, please?
Is everyone hungry? I am, to be fair. So.
We're hungry for a bit more of your presentation, Adam.
I've got the 6-hour one if you want. But
any questions, please? Well, you've obviously comprehensively answered people's questions. Please, a huge round of applause for Adam Smith. Thank you very much indeed.